Very often, we are wanting to plant a tree in the garden, but we keep hesitating. If we plant the tree in the wrong place, or it's not the tree that we exactly wanted, then we're pretty much stuck with that decision. And it is true, yes, it is difficult to move a tree, or it will feel pretty bad getting rid of it. So, what happens then is that we keep reading and looking and trying to come up with the perfect decision. Then we just look at the examples that are around us. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of garden centers and nurseries having native trees. Or the neighborhoods, especially the older neighborhoods, often may not have many native trees around. Things are changing now. With the new neighborhoods, a lot of the areas are going for drought tolerant. And when it comes to drought tolerant, many are using the native trees. Not all of them are native trees, but many are choosing to go with native trees. So we are seeing native trees more often these days in the nurseries. So in this episode, I am talking about two of the common native trees in the Southwest region, but from the perspective of their wildlife benefits, as well as how they can help create a beautiful design in any garden space. Welcome to this episode of Garden and Nature Southwest. I am Vani Shukla. So let me first start with elderberry. And the one I'm talking about is the Mexican elderberry. And you might find it under different names, different common names like blue elderberry or Arizona elderberry. There's several others. But what you want to look at to confirm is the scientific name. And the scientific name for this is Sambucus cerulea. The word cerulea is for blue because this tree has sort of bluish green foliage. In the beginning, it did not catch my attention. It was not something that I got curious about because in the neighborhood I was seeing this more being used for privacy in front of the window, more as a privacy screen. That's how I was seeing it. And so this was not something that I was really looking for in my garden design. However, because I was creating a wildlife habitat in my new garden and I was always looking for new plants, I was specifically looking for plants that will provide food to the wild birds. And elderberry is definitely loved by birds. So I mainly got it for that reason. But it's after growing the tree for the last 3 years that I've realized that it's not just for privacy. Even when you consider the design part of it, it's not just for privacy. This is a beautiful tree and very flexible. It can fit in any garden design. But let me first talk about the wildlife part of it. It's just a magnet for birds and insects, the pollinators. So as soon as the berries start coming in, and it blooms from all the way from spring to late fall. It continues to bloom and continues to produce berries. And the most common visitors in my garden are mockingbirds, thrashers, verdants, and during the migratory season, we get warblers and orioles. We also had blue grosbeak. So there are many birds that are attracted to the tree. And it's not only the berries that attract the birds, but also the fact that it has very dense foliage. So it's a nice place for the birds to hide in. It's a nice tree for them to make a nest. They can stay safe and hidden from the predators. So when it comes to birds, it's definitely a really good tree. Now, it also invites other small mammals like chipmunks and squirrels. My garden hasn't seen those yet. The tree has been in my garden for about 3 years now, but there are lots of pollinators that it gets. And as I mentioned, it produces blooms all the way from spring to late fall. So pretty much throughout the year, you're getting a lot of native bees, butterflies, honeybees. And I read about this beetle in California, the Valley Longhorn elderberry beetle, that is dependent on the elderberry tree. And it is considered threatened because of the habitat loss, because of the loss of elderberry in wild. So there are many insects that we know about and they get some attention, like the valley elderberry beetle or the monarchs, but there are many more insects that we don't even know about that are dependent on these native trees and native plants that are probably threatened. So the more we choose these native trees, the more we are supporting these insects. And when there's good insect population, so will come the beautiful birds and other wildlife to your garden. So again, a really nice tree for insects, small mammals, birds, and if you are wanting to create that wildlife habitat, definitely I could recommend this tree. And it is very fast growing. I got this in a 5-gallon nursery container, and in 3 years, it is about 10-12 feet in size. So it grew very quickly, and the growth rate will be faster if it gets more water. Our rainwater overflow goes in the nearby region. Also, the watering hose is also close by. So off and on, it keeps getting that extra water also. And that might be one of the reasons contributing to its fast growth. And the fast growth and the dense growth can be used to your benefit for the design purposes also. If you want it for the privacy, let it grow, let all the branches become very dense. But if you want more like a tree form with some trunk showing and few strong branches at the base, then you can do that. You can prune off the lower branches. It's not a good idea to heavily prune it or to try to make it thin, because that will be going too much against the nature of this plant, and you're going to be losing some of the benefit it has to the wildlife. The dense foliage is what is attractive to the wildlife, and the more foliage you have, the more dense the plant is, the more blooms, the more flowering that you will have. So you don't want to make it too thin. However, if you prune off the lower branches, then you can get a trunk and few strong branches, and they can have quite a bit of character. The bark, the surface texture of the bark is quite interesting. Also, the shape of the branches gets quite interesting. And because it is fast growing, you can change it around. If you figure out that that's not how you wanted the shape to be for the lower branches, you can let others grow and prune the old ones. So it's quite flexible. And how I want you to imagine this tree is, if you're imagining it in your garden design, is just imagine a trunk that has just very interesting bark texture with few beautifully shaped branches coming out of it with quite a bit of character, and then you have a thick round canopy on top. We're not talking about very wide canopy like in let's say honey mesquite. It's not that. It's more sort of a rounded shape, very dense, but that creates a very dense shade underneath. And how high the canopy is going to be will depend on how much you prune from the base. I would not prune it too high, again, keeping in mind the wildlife benefit it has. But even if you have a canopy starting from, let's say, 4 or 5 feet, this tree would look really nice. And just imagine a small bench underneath that shade. The cooling effect it gives you just by looking at that. You can also have a bird bath underneath, or you can hang a bird bath or a feeder from one of those branches. And that creates a beautiful look as well. Also, you can grow maybe some shade-loving plants underneath, maybe some columbines. So it does have that potential of creating this beautiful garden look in a small space. Even if you have a large garden, you can create this small corner, this small space with this tree. That would look just absolutely amazing. Another way you can use this in your garden is to hide up structures. For example, if you want to hide the compost bins, then of course all the wildlife benefit is there and it's giving you that functional advantage. You can even create a nice tall hedge with this tree. So many ways how you can use this. Now, when you look for it in the nursery, some of the nurseries might be carrying the American elderberry or the common elderberry, which is Sambucus nigra, subspecies canadensis. That is also a native of North America, but it's more in the eastern part of the US, the northern part of the US. In our western US, the southwestern region, it's the Mexican elderberry. In its scientific name also, sometimes Sambucus nigra is used, but the Sambucus nigra, The subspecies will always be cerulea, or sometimes they will just use Sambucus cerulea, not Sambucus nigra subspecies cerulea, but just Sambucus cerulea. So either way, you should find the word cerulea in its scientific name, either in the species or subspecies. Or sometimes it's also called Sambucus mexicana, and that's the same as well. Now let's talk about another one of a common native tree that you see around Southwest, especially the desert regions of the Southwest US. You find desert willow. The scientific name for this is Chilopsis linearis. And you can find the scientific name in the show notes for this episode. So desert willow was another one of those that I initially did not want it when I first came to Southwest. But again, same thing with this tree. As I learned more about it, as I learned not only the benefit that it has to the wildlife, but also how beautiful designs can be created in the garden using this tree, it definitely appeals to me. And the blooms, well, they're different cultivars, so you will find so many different shades of pink depending on the cultivar. There's a cultivar called Bubba, B-U-B-B-A, Desert Willow Bubba. This cultivar has bright purple-looking flowers, and they're tubular shaped, so hummingbirds love this. And because it is just covered with flowers all around, I see multiple hummingbirds on the same tree. You know how when you see a hummingbird feeding off a plant, there would be another hummingbird coming to chase that hummingbird off. But I think because this tree has so many blooms, I often see 2 or 3 or 4 hummingbirds feeding at the same time. They will still fight when they get close to each other, but it's still a delight to see so many hummingbirds hanging around this plant, either feeding or just resting on the branches. Also, the bumblebees, other native bees. I also see butterflies. This tree is just such a happy place. And when it comes to birds, it's not just the hummingbirds, but also so many other birds are attracted to it. Probably because they're feeding on the insects, tiny insects that might be on the tree. So especially during the migratory season, I have seen different species of warblers, also orioles, and verdants are there throughout the year. So this tree, I call it a really joyful and happy tree because it's just full of life throughout the day. And at the end of the day, when it starts to get dark, I see a lot of moths visiting. So this is truly a wildlife attractant for lots of pollinators, different types of insects, and birds. And from the design standpoint, it is again another one of those trees that is very flexible. It can fit in most of the design settings. One of the properties that you can use it to your advantage is that it does not have a dense foliage. So for our elderberry tree, the dense foliage you can use to hide things. You can use it for privacy, but for desert willow, it's the opposite. The foliage is more thin, sparse, so it will give you dappled shade underneath. You can grow a lot of different plants, even vegetable plants, because they need some sun, but need some protection from the hot afternoon sun in the summer as well. So it can definitely be used for that. Also in the front yard, let's say if you have a patio in the front yard and you don't want your house to be completely hidden, but you want a little bit of shade and a tree there. So this can be a great addition there. Now, people often get concerned about the leaf litter. I used to too in the beginning, initially when I was not very fond of this tree, I don't want the leaf litter, so I don't want the tree. But my perspective has changed over time. What I used to think as litter, it's really something very useful to create a wildlife habitat. It is something that a lot of insects and the lizards and toads and all of these are going to be using that leaf litter. All the leaves in the pods that drop, they create a mulch on the soil. So you're helping your soil ecosystem also. You're creating the soil microlife. And from a design perspective too, it will work really well. That leaf litter, you can use it to create this natural looking area. Maybe have a stone bench underneath or a rustic looking wooden bench. Have a couple of large agaves underneath, or maybe next to that rustic looking bench have some salvia gregii. The blooms will be brighter when the salvias, which are pretty heat and sun tolerant, but when they're under some shade, their flowers will be brighter and larger. So that look where you have bench, salvia gregii, maybe some columbines or blue salvia mixed in with some cacti and agave, or it could be near any plant bed. If you have a large garden and you have dirt paths going in, it could be on the side of the path. You may probably want to avoid it near a clean looking patio, but if the patio has more sort of a natural look with flagstones, then it could still work. When the flagstones are set just with sand in between, just a dirt in between, then that kind of a natural looking patio could still have a tree drop its leaf litter and it will look just fine. Where it would not look fine is if you have, let's say, nice tiles or nice clean concrete in a patio. On that, maybe it will not go fine. And especially if the other elements in that design are very nicely manicured and clean looking, then it may not go well in that particular area, but you can still grow it further from that area near a plant bed. Now, this is another plant that is super easy to grow. It will grow anywhere. It's quite drought tolerant and it grows fast. This is another one that I got in a 5-gallon container, a small plant about 2-3 feet tall, and now it's about 15 feet or a little bit more than that. And again, with this tree also you can prune the lower branches to create really nice shapes with the branches. And with this tree, you can create the canopy high or low as you want it. And because the foliage is kind of thin and sparse, you can also use it in areas where you have a good view, but you really want a tree also. You're looking to grow a tree for wildlife or for shade or just for garden ecosystem, but you do not want to block a good view completely. So this could be a really good tree for that. So to sum up, what I want to mention is that the hesitation we have sometimes for growing trees, and especially native trees, and I mentioned especially native trees because we may not find as many examples in real life for how you would use native trees in your garden design. When you don't have that real life example, you hesitate even more. But I can tell you, with these two native trees, the elderberry and the desert willow, and of course there are many others, we'll go over them in future episodes, but the native tree choices that I mentioned today, you get so much flexibility as far as the design and how it fits in your garden, but also, most of all, when it brings so much life in your garden, when you see all those birds stopping by, when you see birds nesting, when you see hummingbirds, when you see butterflies and lots of bumblebees, or hummingbirds chasing each other on the desert willow, or a mockingbird startles you when you walk by the elderberry tree because it's such a dense foliage and the birds are hiding in there, and only when you're walking by the tree they just suddenly come out of the tree. It just creates a very happy garden. And when we bring more of these native options in our gardens, we're supporting wildlife that are losing their habitat. So that is all for today's episode. I will see you in the next one soon. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.